In this episode of the TOWTalk Podcast, Neil and I discuss gaslighting here in the town with regard to our financial woes. But before we get started, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Click that bell so you get notified when new videos drop and when we go live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Without any further delay, let's get into it. Good afternoon. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Today is, of course, Sunday, May 10th, Mother's Day, and you are with TOWTalk. And I'm Denise. I'm here with Neil. And today we are going to go over some local issues. So Neil, we have some stuff going on locally in the town. Once again, the finances are at issue, with the other side sort of trying to say there's nothing to see here. So could you kind of give us a background as to what's going on and then bring us up to date?
Yeah, the they're doubling down on the nothing to see here topic, right? So let's get into some background. We can go back, if we want to go back, we can go back to 2017 when I was basically being told you're not getting any financial information, in which case I was sitting there yelling, I want financial information. And I was on the town board. I was a councilman for the town for a number of years, and they refused to provide it to me. And so much so that I had to threaten to sue the town. That's how far it came.
Really?
I actually hired an attorney and threatened to sue the town because they refused to provide me financial information. But yet nothing's wrong. Nothing to see here. Refused to give it to an accountant who they lied about. Remember, they said I wasn't an accountant, but I am an accountant.
You're literally
figure, right?
comptroller in a nearby town now.
Right. So let's get beyond that. Let's start with our current supervisor, who was the former supervisor back in 2021. Back in 2021, right, we, as in we, the town board and the town, hired O'Connor Davies to do a risk assessment. That risk assessment basically looked at the town's controls and said, you have none. Okay? You have no controls. This is in 2021. Okay? All right? And here I'm saying you have no controls. Money could be leaving and you have no idea, right? Money could be leaving the town and you have no idea. You have no controls. There is nobody reviewing the financial information at all, okay? That was back in 2021. What did they do in response to that? And to the fact that there was a councilman who was refusing to pay his water bill, okay? Right?
Oh, my God.
So that was all happening. What did they decide to do? They decided to frame the supervisor, Dendanto,
Yes.
at the time, right, for harassment of the accountant of the town, right,
the
who was
gatekeeper
failing
of the
to
money.
provide, right, who oversaw the money and refused to provide any financial information to myself as deputy supervisor at the time and to the town supervisor. The law is clear on these things, and they were violating the law. So much so that the state comptroller had to come in 2022, right? The state comptroller's office came in, okay, and one of the auditors said, wow, you guys have no controls. So much so, he decided to actually steal the money himself. He was like, oh, wow, this is like a faucet. I can just take the money. And he did. Okay?
$405,000 worth.
$405,000, right? From 2022 to 2024, for over 2 years, he stole the money. So, and then in 2024, right, they lost their bond rating. So now what they're trying to tell you, okay, and this is the funniest part, they're trying to tell you, well, you didn't hear anything for 4 years. Well, was there a press release about the $405,000 being stolen? No. Was there a press release from the town regarding the bond rating? No, because they hid everything. They did not discuss it. They didn't tell anybody. So, yeah, you didn't hear about it. That is truthful because of the fact that they refused to tell you about it and disclose it to you.
Would they
Okay?
really want to advertise that while they're in control? No, they
Right.
didn't want you to know that, right? What was that make them look at? So, no, I think they were hoping that this would, either stay buried or they could bring it out if they lost power. And what happened is that didn't work out that way.
Well, it's you you sit there and you have this idea. It's the idea that if you don't discuss something, then it didn't happen. And that's just not the way the world works. So everybody take a step back into your personal lives. Sometimes the consequences of an action don't you don't see that for some time. It could be years before the consequences of an action rears its ugly head. We always talk about consequences of actions. Well, their consequences of not doing their job had led to the town's loss of the bond rating and the stolen money. That was years in the making. It wasn't something that just happened overnight. It was years in the making because of negligence, because they failed to do their job, and yet now want to turn around and say, well, there were no financial issues for 4 years. But there were. What happened is when Frank came in 2021, he sounded an alarm. Okay. And that alarm was, hey, we need to get this shit together. Otherwise, there are going to be consequences. Well, now are the time when you face those consequences. Yeah, there weren't consequences right then and there. Oh my God, there weren't consequences right then and there. Have we become such a society where everything has to happen like right then? There has to be an immediate consequence to an action.
And if there isn't, it didn't happen because we are so reactionary now. There
Right.
must if
So
it happened, why wasn't there a reaction then? Because they were burying it.
so let
That's
me
why.
ask you a question. This, and I mean, I know we're going to go into this a little later, but just kind of like want to touch on this a little bit. Does that mean none of those victims of Jeffrey happened because there were no consequences?
Good question.
Right.
Or because
This is the problem that we have today in politics. The consequences of actions that are happening today, we don't see for a while. It could be months, it could be years. Everybody keeps talking about what's happening. Everything under Biden was all Biden's fault. A lot of those things were a result of actions that Trump took that we were paying for years later. And we are going to continue paying for those now that they've done that one big beautiful bill, a crappy bill that will have consequences for decades to come. In fact, this entire administration, there'll be consequences for decades to come. So this idea that well, there aren't consequences today, so we don't have to, so they didn't happen. Well, I'm sorry, my gas prices are going up. Everything's going up. There are consequences. So when we talk about the town, some of these consequences didn't come to fruition for a long time. Day one, the supervisor, Frank Danto, gets into office, okay, and he's told, we don't have the money to make payroll.
yeah.
I can tell you exactly why that occurred and why for 4 years we didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything. We didn't know, other than the fact that we lost the bond rating and the money was stolen. So I want to thank Luisa Ingracia, the town clerk, for fulfilling my foil regarding the ARPA money. ARPA was American Rescue Plan money. It was money that was given to municipalities right during COVID. It was called COVID money. We all called it COVID money. The town
Okay.
received $2.8 million in COVID money. What did they do with the $2.8 million? Operating costs. They used it to balance their budget.
Because they knew that they were
They had
over
no money.
they
Yes,
had no
they
money.
knew that they had no money, and the best way to fill in the gaps was utilizing the ARPA money. Well, there is no ARPA money left. They didn't raise taxes the way that they were supposed to because they wanted to win an election. Everything was about maintaining power and winning elections. They didn't care. And now all of a sudden the taxpayers have to suffer at the hands of these idiots who were in office.
Because of their
And that's what they
incompetence.
were. They're
Now
incompetent.
now, let me ask you a question. With regard to the ARPA money, what was that meant to be used for? What did they want that to be used for? Or was there a reason?
It, it, there were so many things that were occurring at that time. The problem is that there was, you know, we were given mandates to stay home. So some of the employees ended up having to work. They were considered to be essential employees. Your local municipal government, really everybody's an essential employee.
Yeah,
So the idea is to help supplement some of that income. It was also because of the supply chain issues that we saw,
yeah,
okay, the federal government stepped in and said we want to basically bear some of the burden of the increased costs because
okay,
we understand we are redirecting manufacturers to manufacture other things, and some of the things that you need may cost more
got it.
as a result. In addition, we had to buy a lot of PPE. Okay.
Yes,
So, because everybody had to be masked, everybody had to wear gloves, we were client facing. So you had to put up those like plastic barriers everywhere where if somebody came into the building, there was a plastic barrier. So that way, if somebody was coughing, they weren't coughing on an employee. We wanted to protect our employees. So it was supposed to be for like all of that. And based on your municipality size, determined how much money you got. So the town had received back then $2.8 million. Okay. And these idiots didn't know how to spend the money, waited to the last minute, and decided in the last like 2 years that they were going to put a lot of the money into basically operating. So things that you would normally want to purchase through your operating costs, they bought using ARPA money. They basically planted it in their budget and they said, well, we can use ARPA money for this. And basically ARPA money was a supplement of revenue. So you could use ARPA money for pretty much whatever you wanted at that point in time. It really
but
wasn't too much on it,
right,
too much
but
restriction on it.
assuming you were getting your tax revenue and some of your other, your usual ratables, um, that shouldn't cover that much, that might not have been that much of a shortfall that you needed 2.8 million, or no?
No, but so one of the points I want to make, right, goes back to their budgeting. Okay. Right. So they want to put themselves out there and portray themselves as having passed balanced budgets for the last like 4 years. Okay. Right.
They're funny.
I am sorry. You don't understand what a balanced budget is. It fucking kills me. Right. It really fucking kills me that these idiots don't even know what a balanced budget is. A balanced budget means no spending of fund balance. A balanced budget means that your revenues equal your expenses. Every year for the last 4 years, they budgeted $2 to $3 million in a budget deficit. I pointed this out every fucking year I was on the board that this is what they were doing. In the last 2 years, it was like $2.4, $2.6 million. And now it's like $2.8 million. A budget deficit is not a balanced budget. A budget
Right,
deficit is a budget deficit. That is deficit spending. That means you are spending your savings to balance your budget. I don't understand these people don't understand the terminology, and they think because that they can just go out and say whatever it is that they want and people will believe them. And that gets into our next topic, so I'm not even going to bother like talking about that because we're going to talk about that in a second. But that's really what it is. It's people buying whatever it is that they're selling. And I'm sorry, that's garbage. just go to the page, go to the website, look at the revenues of the budget, and you will see that little budget item, fund balance, right? Appropriated fund balance, and you will see $2.8 million in your general fund. That is deficit spending. That is not a balanced budget. So they had no balanced budget. They were using the ARPA money to help balance their budget, to cover operating costs, because they didn't have the money to do it. And they're like, oh, but we had money. That's not a problem. Well, you had money because you were spending money in places that you shouldn't have been spending money. And that goes to show you that they didn't know how to budget. They didn't know how to manage money. They didn't really know what they were doing. They were just like, we have a pool of money. We just need to spend it, and that's it.
Now, just to clarify, when it comes to this budget balancing, that is also part of the responsibility of the comptroller and the accounting
No,
department, correct? No?
no, nope.
So the board has to do that.
I am sorry. Listen, your accounting department, basically, their job is to just supply numbers. Okay.
Okay,
Right. Their job is really just to account for the numbers and supply them to the board. Okay.
got it.
Your budget officer, who in most towns is your supervisor, is the one who is responsible for the budget. So for the last 4 years, it was George. Okay. George was responsible for that $2.8 million being in the budget. Now you had 3 dumbasses as board members who voted for it, who kept voting for it and didn't ask any questions and didn't want anybody else to see the numbers. I can tell you, I asked, and you can go back to that last meeting when we voted, and I specifically said, am I going to get the information I requested regarding all the backup for all these numbers? Mark Coyne looked at me and he said, no, we're not giving you anything. Vote no. We don't give a shit. That's what they said to me. Okay.
Wow.
So I'm like sick and tired of these lies, as if somehow there weren't warning signs, as if there wasn't. So now we have the consequences of those actions. Like, listen, Ralph Carr may have came in and he may not have said anything. He may have just said, fuck everything. I'm not going to say anything, and I'll just start cutting. All right. And we can blame something else. Okay. And nobody would say anything. But at this point in time, you have a budget that's upside down. You have operating costs that aren't covered by your tax dollars. Okay. And you have a budget deficit of roughly $3 million. And because you borrowed from this year's tax revenue to pay last year's expenses, right? Because they did that. Okay. You're now $4 million in the hole.
Wow. And that's
Okay.
another question that I wanted to ask. With regard to this constant budget deficit, is that what they were doing all along? Drawing from the following year's taxes to pay for last year's debts that they were running up?
One would think, but so as near as I can tell on this, okay, and you have to kind of go back. So prior to the state comptroller's office coming in 2022, it looks like what was going on was that they were severely understating revenues and reporting revenues to the state. I mean, that came out in that report that we had from the state comptroller's office, the summary, the financial management summary. It basically said you're overestimating expenses and you're underestimating revenues. That came out in a huge way. They're basically saying you guys aren't budgeting correctly. Your budgets are completely wrong.
No
And
surprise.
so it looks like what had happened is that so those results came out fairly quickly. They changed that in the 23 budget and 24 budget. So in the 23 and 24 budget, that $2.8 million budget, they didn't decrease the deficit, like their deficit spending, right? That just we're like, okay, well, we'll boost the revenues, right? will continue overestimating expenses, but they really weren't overestimating expenses because they were spending more and they didn't really know what they were spending money on, but they thought they were. And they were actually deficit spending in a large way for
Wow.
like 3 years, right? So you're talking almost $2 million, over 2 years, and they were like what, at $12 million in whatever it was. They had $12 million in cash in 2022. So, all of a sudden, and then you had the money that was stolen, and then you had the money that was um paid to settle lawsuits and all this other kind of crap. Next thing, and all the accounting fees.
God.
And so now you're talking another $1 million, because now they're like, once they realize, like, oh shit, there are consequences. We can't borrow money because we lost our bond
Oops.
rating. Oops. All of a sudden they had to spend. So now they spent over $1 million just on the accounting, right, to try to fix the accounting, which still isn't fixed. So, now all of a sudden they spent, what, $7-8 million of that that savings that we had. That $12 million, which doesn't leave much in return. And then you got to remember, a lot of, when you talk about revenues and expenses, it's all timing too. So
Okay.
when you start adjusting for timing differences of when you receive certain money and all that kind of stuff, there's a really good chance, at year end, you have no money.
And here we are. That's pretty much where we're at right now. And
Right.
so, just to kind of summarize, folks, don't be gaslit, because that's what they're doing. They're
Yes.
gaslighting you. They're figuring that you have a short-term memory, that you don't have a brain, and that if they tell you what you want to hear, you're going to believe them because it's what you want to hear. But the fact of the matter is that the money was stolen during Serrano's time. The bond rating was lost during Serrano's time. During the last 4 years, all this stuff happened. And they're trying to say there was nothing said. You think they're going to admit to you that they have problems? Of course they're not gonna do that, and now there's another administration in, and there's now there's a different majority, so stuff is actually getting done, and stuff is coming out, and it's not good. So they're attacking it to say, "We did this stuff didn't come out over the last 4
Right.
years." Yeah, it was there. They just didn't tell you. That's the point of this. And so, this kinda is gonna sorta roll into our next topic regarding party loyalty. We're for, and maybe and maybe Neil can explain this a little bit better than I can. But what I'm seeing here is that if your party tells you what you want to hear, you never question it. And if the other side says something that challenges that, you question it up and down because it's not, because you're loyal to your party and forgetting that these are just people that are in these parties. And they're not necessarily loyal to party as much as they're loyal to themselves. And that's what's happening here. You have a group of people that are covering up serious financial problems in our town. And people are hearing this message that there's nothing to see there, and it's what you want to hear, so you tend to believe them, but it's turning out to not be the truth, and you're not willing to listen to the people and listen to the message and listen to the facts. And so, you know, I want to talk a little bit more about how we're more loyal to parties, and it allows those parties to exploit the voters and exploit their supporters because people become so they just put the blinders on. You know what I'm saying?
But that's both parties.
Oh yeah, I
And
absolutely I agree
and
with that.
and 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 that's what's really, that's why I say, all the time, look at any district and you will see that the number of voters who are unaffiliated with either party now outnumber those voters that are registered to a given party, because both parties, and I'm talking party level, I'm not talking about individuals running for a given party, right? Because individuals are different, right? But you look at both parties, and both parties are being paid for by the same people.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Now, locally, again, I go to what is the background of the individual who's supporting that individual, what are the goals of that individual who's running for office, and do they understand the office that they're running for? Okay. So just taking a step back locally, and then we'll kind of build up to where it is nationally, right? You know, Frank is a small business owner. He's managed, finances. He understands what and how important it is to get those finance numbers in check, right? I've seen a lot of people who think they can do the job and can't, and I've seen a lot of people who can, who get in there and do the job. Okay, and I am not seeing anything from her, right, where she is coming out and she can do this job. Just because you were in real estate doesn't mean anything. You're selling a piece of property that somebody else has owned and managed for years. And your job is to just basically say, okay, this is within your price range. That's
Yeah,
it,
it's
and to try to get your commission. That's it.
yeah, that's exactly it. So, you know, think about that. And I want to point something else out during the spill the tea meeting that we had. Uh, Frank actually, he's very, very diplomatic. He doesn't really like to talk much about the election, but he did briefly touch on it. He actually described himself more as independent. He ran on the
Yes.
Democratic Party, but he is either he's independent or unaffiliated. I have to look back. I recorded that, by the way, the entire thing. So
No,
I'll
he's registered Democrat, but he considers himself to be more independent minded.
okay, okay. That's because that's what he talked about. That's what he talked about. Okay, I'm sorry. I digressed.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, it's fine. Listen, everybody thinks that I sit here and I carry water for Frank, but I really don't. Me and him clashed more times, right, than I think the people on the other side. You look at some of those meetings and you look at those votes, you could see that I didn't vote with him every single chance I got. It wasn't like when George was in office and they just voted for everything George wanted. Okay?
Absolute yes
It
men.
was it was very different, and I have no problem speaking truth to power. And the fact is, if he does something wrong, I have no problem saying it. And if the people in this community in the town of Wallkill don't realize that Steve, Don, and Frank are actually fighting for them and to keep this community like together when it comes to finances and to rebuild what was broken by the clown circus. um you know I don't know what to say anymore. I mean, they got sold a bag of goods, they bought into that, and now you're gonna pay the price, and it sucks, but you got fooled. you know let's not do the old adage, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Well, if you get fooled again, shame on you.
Yeah.
That's all I gotta say.
Thanks so much for watching. First of all, I want to welcome all our new followers. We've gotten some new followers that have joined us, and we're growing. We're getting there, and we really do appreciate you. And we do appreciate the comments. People have left comments. We've had some interesting conversations there, and so, as always, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Watch us on Tuesday. We do live streams on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. So make sure you click that bell so you get notified. Um, and watch us. We now go live on Facebook too. So you don't even have to come to YouTube if you don't want to. But we always love you here anyway. All right. So be safe, be well, and happy Mother's Day to all the moms. I know this might appear the day afterwards. So at that point, happy belated Mother's Day. All right. And we'll see you soon, guys. We love you. Be well. Take care.
Peace out.